You're listening to Yoked, Conversations with Real-Life Yogis. I'm Kelly Sunrose, your host. The mission of this podcast is to share the teachings of yoga as applied to everyday life by real people through interviews, conversations, Q&A sessions, and more. Learn more at yokedpodcast.com. Hi everybody, welcome. It's Kelly. And for today's episode of Yoked, Conversations with Real Life Yogis, I will be talking a little bit about my summer yoga reading list. Now, some of you might remember that summertime is when I personally really like to drop into my own practice, and when I give myself a little space for things to be just motivated by my own curiosity. Like, it doesn't need to yield any tangible results. And I kind of let myself just go where I want to go in my own practice, without, the result needing to be necessarily teaching material or, things that will yield creative results or anything like that. I let myself really drop into my own practice almost at my own whim. And this sort of holds true for my reading list as well. During the year, the school year, that is, I'm more or less working on particular projects, whether they're for teaching or whether they're for my own practice. I'm usually sort of reading and practicing in a thematic way. And in the summer, not so much. And so I have this collection of books that I'm really excited to read. And except for one, I haven't even cracked open the first page. So I'm really excited to talk to you about them. And then I thought it might be helpful today if I share a short list of some of my favorite yoga books, and also a few of my favorite Ayurveda books, since we do talk quite a bit about daily rhythms and seasonal shifts and the art and science of Ayurveda. I thought it'd be helpful to kind of share some of my favorites in that discipline. So thanks very much for being here. Before we get into the episode, I thought I would share a little bit of news with you. First bit of news is, oh my goodness, we're just finishing up our Bhagavad Gita immersion, and I just love it so much. It's been really great to share space with 10 yoginis who are so dedicated to the yoga of their real lives. And I just feel really lucky to teach in the immersion format, and just wanted to let you know that our next immersion will be starting in November. Generally, we begin again in September, but since I'm having a baby in July, I gave myself a little more space there so that we could have a better handle on our home rhythm before we get back into the immersion. So in November and December, we'll circle up again with a deeper dive into the breath. And so this will be a pranamaya kosha and pranayama immersion. You don't need to know anything ahead of time. We will approach it together. Anyway, registration for that will open the 1st of June if you want to get in early. I'm really excited about it. Everybody who's listened before probably knows how much I love pranayama, and I've been just dying to do a real-time pranayama immersion. I do have a pranayama course available in my online shop, and which I loved making and I love sharing. But it'll be fun to do some things in real time together and to go deeper into our practice together. Secondly, some of you know that I'm going to be offering an advanced teacher training beginning March of 2018, running through June of 2019. It'll be 150 hours, super robust, for professional yoga teachers with at least 3 years of experience. And we'll be dropping into all kinds of aspects of practice, from philosophy to teaching methodology to ethics to, ethical business and, of course, practice technique and some anatomy and some sequencing. So we're going to do it all. Anyway, all the details and rolling admission will begin in June, so stay tuned for that. Also, finally, although I will be on a kind of maternity leave July and August, in that I won't be teaching any public classes in Portland and I won't be scheduling any one-on-one work during that time, I will still be releasing new material into the Wildcat Yoga Club and new podcasts. So if you want to keep practicing in those months, head on over to wildcatyogaclub.com and join us. In addition to new practices released every week, generally I release a pranayama practice and a movement practice at least. We also have some Dharma practices where we meet in real time, and then I post to the practice library every month a meditation group, a active listening group, and an embodied voice group. And we will be adding on to that selection of real-time coursework in the fall, which I'm really excited about. A little sneak peek, it will be more creativity practices. So anyway, it's $15 a month or $150 a year, and it's a great community. I spend a lot of time with all of the members. I try to make it really personal and have a connection with everyone who's in there, and I would love for you to join us. So thanks everybody for being here. If you have a question or a suggestion for a future episode, or you'd like to recommend a guest who you think would be a good fit for our show, email me at sunroseyoga@gmail.com. Complete show notes and links to everything we talk about in this episode will be available at yokedpodcast.com. Thank you, my loves. So welcome to today's episode of Yoked. I'm sharing my summer yoga reading list, which makes me really happy because I love to read and I love really diving in to a new book, especially in the summer. So I have a little pile here, a little stack, and except for one, I haven't even opened them, which is even, more exciting for me. So the first book on this list is the one that I've actually already opened and read just a little bit because I couldn't help myself. And that is Yoga FAQ by Richard Rosen. FAQ means frequently asked questions. And so the format of this book is question and answer. And so Richard himself formulates the questions and then provides carefully researched, beautifully detailed answers. And it's kind of funny. So the thing that strikes me about this is something that came up in our study of the Bhagavad Gita recently, and that my own teachers have talked about quite a bit, both in the yoga context and also back in the day of when I was a lawyer and when prior to that, when I was in law school. And that is, if we have a question, we have a quest. And, the way that we formulate or define our question is more important than you might think. And in law school and in the law, how you frame the issue before the judge has an effect on how you'll present your argument and present the evidence that you have at your disposal. So I think it is, the answers are wonderful because Richard approaches his work, his writing, his teaching with such curiosity that the questions themselves are as important as the answer. And so I'm really excited about this. We've talked about this before, I think, how Richard is one of my favorite teachers, and also he's one of my favorite writers. And one of the things that I like about Richard Rosen's writing is that he lets the practice speak for itself. Something that kind of bothers me or I have trouble with is when people try or use language to prop up the practice more than it needs to be, to say, oh, yoga is good for everything. Like there's a need to prove yoga as being a worthwhile endeavor and to apply it to all sorts of different diagnoses and pathologies and scenarios, and sometimes to rely on language and lineage, mythology within certain lineages to substantiate or justify the usefulness of practice. And because of that, sometimes we get some, confusing and conflicting information about, what this practice is and what it is good for and what it is not. And we get into the situation where people repeat things over and over and over through the generations that don't necessarily comport with the actual experience that people have. And, if we've practiced together, you've probably heard me say over and over again, trust your own experience. And Richard is such a great model for that. He's so well read. He's so well researched. He has been practicing for nearly 40 years himself and trained with Iyengar and trained at the Iyengar Institute. So he has this, life of practice, this body of work of experience, and he really sort of like gets to the heart of that, like letting ourselves be fully immersed in the practice while keeping, while constantly cultivating our capacity for curiosity and not just taking everything at face value, because the practice doesn't need it. If you just do it, you'll know how it works for you and for your students if you're a teacher. And you won't need to prop it up with, bogus claims. Anyway, so that's why I like Richard as a teacher and as a writer. He's very funny. And I'm excited to dive into this book and have more myths dispelled. So that's number one. And that's the one I've actually cracked the cover of because I was just super duper excited. Number two is another RR author, and this is Ravi Ravindra's new translation and commentary of the Bhagavad Gita, a guide to navigating the battle of life. Ravi is another of my favorite teachers, and one of the things I really love about Ravi is he is a scholar and a practitioner. And the more yoga books you read, the more you can kind of appreciate that nuance. Many times, if you're reading work that comes solely from a practitioner, there's a certain lens through which that the practitioner is viewing the work. And especially if you've worked with the Gita at all, you'll know that some of the versions out there are, I don't know if dogmatic is the right word, but there's a bunch of, there are many layers of the lineage itself that come through in how those writers present the material. And then on the other side of things, if you're reading something that's written by a scholar only, particularly a scholar of Sanskrit, if they don't practice, then a lot of context can be lost, and a lot of the nuance in the language, particularly around how Krishna refers to Arjuna, a lot of that can be lost. And so Ravi brings both. And this is true in his version of the Yoga Sutra, which is my favorite and I absolutely adore, is he brings that that academic, intellectual, scholarly view of the work, as well as his own experience. So there's frequently he uses poetry and quotes from his teachers and his lineage, and also draws quite a bit from his study of Christian literature and Christian works to sort of engage with the material in that way. I also really appreciate, or have appreciated in the past in Ravi's writing, his perspective in offering, just sort of context as far as Indian culture goes with some of this work. And that is super helpful, and for me has really clarified some of the aspects of the Yoga Sutra in general. And so anyway, I am really excited to dive into Ravi Ravindra's version of the Bhagavad Gita. And it has been extremely hard for me not to open this, because as you know, I'm teaching this Bhagavad Gita immersion right now, and I've sort of limited myself to a couple of different translations, for the purpose of this immersion. And I've really been excited to get into this, and I'll let you know how I end up liking it. Next on this list of summer yoga reading is Vashishtha's yoga. And this is really long. I will tell you that. Vashista's yoga is, I mean, at least the claim that they make in the foreword or in the intro is that this is the third longest book in the world. And it's long. It's 750 pages. And this is a similar text to the Gita in that there's some bridging of the gap between your contemplative life and your practical life. And it's presented in conversations and in stories and thematically around certain aspects of self-awareness and self-realization. And so I'm excited about that, to learn some new stories and, to kind of dive into this. I have not opened it at all other than to kind of just scan the table of contents and to kind of flip through and see how the whole thing is kind of organized. And so I'm excited to read Vashista's Yoga. I'll let you know how it goes. I don't have the depth of contextual information that I do on this because I don't know that much about it. It was recommended. Now I can't even. Okay, scratch all of this because I can't give any useful information. Suffice it to say, I don't know much about it. I do know that on the back cover, Wendy Doniger, one of my other favorite writers, has written a little blurb on the back cover, which for me is kind of a good sign. Her book, The Hindus, I highly recommend if you want to do a deep dive into sort of the alternative history of practice. Okay, so finally, my final book on this summer reading list is called The Wisdom of Yoga, A Seeker's Guide to Extraordinary Living by Stephen Cope. Stephen Cope wrote The Great Work of Your Life, which is one of the books that we've been reading in our Bhagavad Gita immersion. And he also wrote another book that I've read called Yoga and the Quest for the True Self. He works at Kripalu. I think he is, one of the higher ups at Kripalu. And his writing is really great. I've enjoyed everything so far that I've read by Stephen Cope because he really brings the practice into the work of our lives. He shares a lot of stories in his other books about himself, people he knows, his family, and then also he tends to bring in examples of various aspects of practice to some of the great thinkers and doers of our time. He did, at least in The Great Work of Your Life, which was a book about the Bhagavad Gita as applied to daily life. And this book, The Wisdom of Yoga, I think, I love reviewing things that I haven't even opened yet, I think is sort of an application of the Yoga Sutra to everyday life. So I'm super excited to read that and sort of his application in his voice. His books are extremely readable, and at least in the past, some of the quotes that he includes really get me going in directions that I never would have dreamed, or pique my interest in other people who I never would have thought I would be so interested in. So I'm excited about that one. Now, on to my short list of a few of my favorite yoga books. Now, this is really tricky because I have so many books that, I end up having kind of a relationship with, where I like carry them around for months and months and months, like really soaking up a couple of lines from them. And then after a while, it's sort of like I have just loved a particular book almost to death, and have to like tape them together. And so it's hard for me to choose favorites because I go through phases of who my favorites are. As far as yoga, asana, and sort of the work of being in a yoga pose and fully embodying the pose, I have a couple of books there that I really love. And the first is by my teacher, Eric Schiffman, Moving into Stillness, Yoga, the art and practice of moving into stillness. Now, this is just a beautiful, gorgeous book because Eric talks about being in the shapes, which is something that you don't really get in the more technical asana manuals like Light on Yoga or other books along those lines. Those are very sort of oriented on put your feet here. Here are a list of supposed benefits and counterindications. Eric's book isn't really like that. It sort of offers sequences to find your way into various shapes, and then, maybe where to bring your attention in the pose while you're, while you're in it. And it's just a great book. So I recommend that one if you're looking for an asana book. Also, quite similar, but less asana focused, is Vanda Scaravelli's book, Awakening the Spine. Now, this book, she was also another student of Iyengar's, and who didn't take up the practice until she was over 40, which I love hearing. And the book is sort of organized around, they're short essays on various themes, which, I guess in a 21st century context, they almost read like a longer blog post, like where she is sharing her practice notes with us. And it's so beautiful. And it really, I think, brings the reader back to the essence of practice. It's all based on her own experience. And she does, near the end of the book, go into some postural information, but it's largely experiential and really beautiful inspiration for practice. And so that was Awakening the Spine by Vanda Scaravelli. I also adore the Radiance Sutras by Lauren Roche. Now, this is a version of the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, and it's so beautiful. It's so beautifully written. It's so beautifully organized. And the beauty of the tantric works is, at least in my opinion, is like this bringing of the practice to life. Like, this is very much a a text and language around fully embracing the life that you're living. And it's just beautiful. The language, it's just amazing. It's so beautiful. And I read from it quite a bit in class and just in my own life. And there are certain verses that are, slightly technical in that there is a technique embedded within them, but most of it is pure poetry and really inspiring. So highly recommend that one. Finally, for now, I told you this was hard for me. One of my other absolute favorite yoga books is Original Yoga by Richard Rosen. And I, mentioned Richard is on a stack of books for my summer reading list, but Original Yoga is one that I come back to over and over and over again. And in this book, he really breaks down the practices of Hatha Yoga and makes them accessible. And in his yogi scientist way, sort of, invites us to practice with a healthy dose of curiosity. And so it's one that I just come back to again and again and again. Again, that's more of a, it's a practice manual, but it's also an overall approach to the practice. So that's a short list of a few of my favorite yoga books. I also wanted to mention a few of my favorite Ayurveda books that I am constantly recommending to people who are interested in learning about and diving deeper into their Ayurveda practice. Now, the first is called Happy, Healthy, and Sexy by Katie Silcox. This book is primarily geared toward women, but there is so much in it. It is a really accessible way to get a lot of Ayurveda and Tantra knowledge. The title makes it sound light, Happy, Healthy, Sexy, but and the way Katie writes is very invitational and accessible, but she knows her stuff, and this book really goes there. So I think it's one of my favorite Ayurveda books. I think it's fantastic. Now, the second book I would recommend is Prakriti by Dr. Robert Svoboda. And this book is wonderful because it gives you an overall sort of sensibility of what Ayurveda is capable of accomplishing and just sort of like how it fits into the context of, the nature of reality. So you begin sort of with this really broad spectrum of Ayurveda knowledge, and then it sort of winnows or becomes sort of organizes itself around particular aspects of practice and approaches to the science of health. I just love it. And Dr. Svoboda is a wonderful writer as well. So, Prakriti by Dr. Robert Svoboda. Thanks so much for listening today. I'm curious about what your favorite yoga and Ayurveda books are, or what you are interested in reading this summer. Do share, do tell, email me. And don't forget, we also have this really fun community project in the works. Send me a voice memo with your name, where you're writing from, and then, why you practice yoga and what your most potent practices are. We're going to put them all together and share them. So thanks, everybody. Love to all. Thanks so much for listening to today's podcast. Complete show notes are available at yokedpodcast.com. Please feel free to connect by emailing me at sunroseyoga@gmail.com. Today's episode is made possible by the Wildcat Yoga Club, our online yoga community. The clubhouse contains an ever-expanding library of audio and video practices, plus lectures, tutorials, and video Q&A sessions, plus monthly online workshops in meditation, active listening, and embodied voice. Membership also includes discounts on all courses, retreats, and products in the Sunrose Yoga shop. All of this for $15 a month or $150 per year. Connect with the yoga of real life by visiting www.wildcatyogaclub.com. Thanks.